Hi, and welcome to Leave, a podcast series by Startuplifers. This is the first episode of our brand new podcast inspired by alumni who share their life-changing experiences from working at some of the most exciting startups in the world. The goal with this podcast is to have a warm and cozy conversation together with a wonderful alumni who share their life-changing experiences from working at some of the most exciting startups in the world. You'll hear real-life stories from those who've made it, how the experience changed their life, and where they are today. Startuplifers is a non-profit organization connecting emerging Nordic talent with the most exciting startup jobs. I'm your host, Pauliina Alanen, and today I have the pleasure to be here with the Startuplifers alumni, Satu Peltola. Let's hear her story with Startuplifers, living in San Francisco, and where life has taken her since then. So welcome to the show, Satu. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Who are you and what do you do now?
Hi, so I'm Satu. I'm currently living in Helsinki. I'm a UX designer and right now I'm leading the UX team at Relex. Relex is a company that creates products for retail optimization. So, for example, products for supply chain management, workforce optimization. These products are used by retail companies.
Let's go a little bit back in history and start with Startuplifers. When were you in San Francisco and what did you do there?
Yeah, so I was in San Francisco in 2015, so it's been a while. I was working for a company called Coinbase as a UX designer. I lived in SF for 1 year, and then after that I worked remotely for 8 months in Finland. And then after that I worked for another American company called Unity, and I was working in Helsinki, but Unity is headquartered in SF, so I was going back and forth all the time, and altogether I kind of spent around 4 years working in SF.
Okay, very interesting. So kind of 5 years ago in 2015, when you left, that kicked off a journey of going back and forth to California for work after you lived there for those 8 months.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a way longer story with San Francisco than I ever expected, but I really like the city, and it's been really nice to be able to kind of keep those friendships and all of those things going during this time.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that you now have those connections there. So maybe let's go a little bit further even. When did you first hear about Startuplifers and how did you decide to go for it?
Yeah, so I had been thinking about kind of wanting to experience Silicon Valley. I had heard, I don't think startups weren't as big of a thing when I was studying, but Aalto S had made a little bit of a buzz in Otaniemi, and I think I had maybe heard about Silicon Valley somewhere, and I was just getting started in tech. I had my first job, and somehow I got this idea that I would really like to move to San Francisco or work in Silicon Valley one day. And it was just this like, hey, maybe one day during my career when I'm like really old and experienced and it would be possible to me. But then I heard about Startuplifers from a friend, and it actually turned out that there's this really great opportunity to go as a student. And it was definitely something that I hadn't been thinking about doing so soon in my career, but then when I heard about it, it felt like, okay, now I have to do it, because it was something I had thought about as a bucket list item. One day I want to live there. So basically, yeah. I applied twice. The first time I basically didn't get any response from any of the companies. I made my portfolio and I updated my LinkedIn profile and sent the application. I was really, really hopeful. I got some really good input from the Startuplifers team, and I felt like I'm definitely gonna get it. And it was basically, I didn't hear anything back. No, I saw that a couple of companies had looked at my LinkedIn profile, but other than that, there was nothing happened afterwards. But then there was at that time, it was basically batches. So there were specific times when you could apply. I don't know how it works these days, but during the fall, this was like during the spring and then 2014, and then during the fall there was another batch or another opportunity to apply, and I was like, well, what the hell, I have already this portfolio and the application, so I'm just going to do some adjustments. I changed my title to be UX designer instead of interaction designer, and I also added a couple of more recent projects, maybe a little bit more visual projects than the other ones that I had before. And then it turned out really, really good that I applied twice. Like, it was really good that I put in the application the second time, because then I had an opportunity to basically choose between 3 different companies. So I talked with 3 different companies, had the video calls and interviews with all of them, and then got to decide which company I want to go to. So it was a pretty big different experience than my first application round.
Yeah.
And yeah, it like kind of goes to show that sometimes you just have to have that perseverance and try again, even if you fail the first time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what a change how you described that. Then after you tweaked your portfolio and added some new projects, you got introduced to 3 companies, and you interviewed with all 3 of them, right?
Yeah, I did interviews with all of them, and it was honestly quite difficult to choose between them because I wasn't that familiar with San Francisco or any of the tech companies, and all of the startups were at very different stages. And but then in the end, I was like, there was a lot of buzz around Coinbase, and also some of the people that worked at Coinbase I was just very, very impressed by, and I really wanted to get to work with them. So then I felt like that would be the company where I could learn the most, and decided to go with that.
Sounds like it was definitely a good choice. Well, obviously many of our listeners are now aware of Coinbase and how it has been growing, but could you describe how was the company when you first got there, and how it grew during your 1 year time there?
Right. When I started, we had, I think, 50 people. And then I would say we had support. We had, like, at the office, we had 50 people. And then for customer support, we had remote people all over US just to cover a little bit more time zones. And that was maybe altogether, the remote workforce was like 40 people. So altogether, I think we had like 90 employees. I've heard that nowadays it's around 1,000 employees, so it's a very different company. Whoa. Probably to what it was back then. We were just on one floor, and it was still like the office was very, very nice. We had a great view. And it wasn't definitely like the company was already quite far along. There was a significant amount of funding, and there was a big customer base, some kind of product market fit for especially like the consumer brokerage side. Yeah, it was a very interesting experience for sure. It was a small team working on something with a really, really big potential and a really, really big backers behind the company. I definitely didn't understand what I was going into when I went there. Let's put it that way.
Well, it definitely is a life-changing experience to move there, but also if you're in a company with such a stellar growth path ahead, yeah, it must be quite an experience. So let's go a little bit further into your life and moving to California and San Francisco in particular. Had you been there before you actually moved there, or did you know anyone beforehand?
So I didn't know anyone in San Francisco. I didn't know anything about the city except for some photos I had seen. It's actually, now that I think about it afterwards, I wonder how I even got the idea to move there. Because I didn't know anything about San Francisco and had never met anyone who had lived there. Yeah. But somehow I got that thought into my head and wanted to really do it. The only people, when I moved to San Francisco, the only people that I knew were the people that I had interviewed with. And Yeah, I just read up a lot on internet. If there would have been this kind of podcast, I probably would have listened to every episode because I really like to study my material before doing anything new. Yeah, that's basically it. Very, very much like just based on whatever I saw on the internet.
That's pretty amazing and pretty brave as well.
Well, you had a very similar experience, right?
Yeah, I did actually. I hadn't even like seen so many photos before going, so I was quite amazed by how different my only experience was New York City.
Yeah,
So
I have the same thing.
it
Yeah.
yeah, so it was like quite the opposite, and I had never been to the West Coast
Yeah.
before. So yeah. Well, how about then when you moved there? Did you have an apartment on your arrival, or how did you fix the apartment?
So we have a Facebook group for all the startup lifers, and I was able to ask there if someone knew anyone renting an apartment. And this one person who was in the group had a friend, a local San Francisco friend, who was moving out of their apartment, and she shared this Craigslist link to me. It wasn't like a reference or anything. It wasn't like, hey, this apartment is great. It was more like, this is a guy I once met at a party. We're Facebook friends. He's moving out. Here's a link I saw. And it was a Craigslist ad. And then there was like a link to a Google Forms application. So I filled out an application for the
Typical
apartment.
San Francisco.
Right. Yeah, apartments are in pretty high demand. So then after I sent the application, where I also included I was thinking I'll probably come off really sketchy because I'm coming from Finland. I'm not able to meet them face to face. So I included all of my social media stuff like Instagram and all these things to prove that I'm a real person. And then they had a Skype actually I had like 2 rounds of interviews with them where they also took me around the apartment showing with Skype and like webcam what the apartment looks like. Or it was basically, it wouldn't be an apartment, it was a Victorian house, like one of those really traditional San Francisco houses.
Yeah. Where was it?
Oh, in Noe Valley. So this family oriented, very, very sunny and beautiful neighborhood. Definitely loved living there.
I also lived there actually.
You did? Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a wonderful neighborhood.
Yeah, it's so nice. I was on 28th Street and it's just, taking the tram to work every day. Yeah, one of the best times. But yeah, so it was basically there was the interviews, and for some reason my future roommates saw some potential in me, and we had a really good chemistry right away. So then they decided to offer the room to me, and I basically rented it without ever seeing it. And then when I arrived to San Francisco, I just took a taxi to this house and hoped that it actually exists. I wouldn't recommend, I wouldn't necessarily say this is the best practice. I had actually already sent some money over by PayPal. And I was thinking maybe this might be a scam. Like there is no way for me to know, but I just have to trust it. And luckily it was completely real. And the house was there, and these awesome people became kind of my family in SF, and I've been to their weddings, and we still, even now during Corona times, we're Skyping.
Oh, that's really great. And yeah, very, very lucky as well to find those people and that apartment. So did you then end up staying there for the entire year? Yeah,
definitely. And even actually, so the house is, as far as I know, the house is kind of still in the family. So some of I think none of us, the roommates that lived there at that point, still live there, but some of their friends are still living there. And I've basically every time I go to San Francisco, I go there, and sometimes I've even stayed there for a couple of nights when I've needed a place to stay. So it's really nice that I'm able to still go to the house where I lived in 2015. So really, really special coincidence.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's one of those experiences that like makes the year in California so unique, and kind of you have this SF family now that you have maintained contact with. So that's really great. Now let's move on a little bit to the working life that you had in San Francisco and working at Coinbase. Would you be able to describe me some differences in working in SF compared to working in Finland, for example?
I would say a lot of the American startups have, from what I've seen, have slightly more ambitious attitude than maybe companies in Finland. I think it's, for better and for worse, they really just start from the beginning before they've even necessarily built anything. They really just believe they have everything that it takes to disrupt the whole industry, and every goal is set incredibly ambitious. Of course, they have what they have on their side is also that the funding rounds that the startups are able to raise are way, way bigger than in Finland. So even if you are quite early on, there are many companies that are really well funded. It obviously depends on the founders and what kind of connections they have, and also like what the concept is and how easy it is to find backers. But a lot of the companies are quite well funded and have really, really ambitious goals. I think that goes probably for Finland as well. I would say just like maybe in Finland it's more, at least before it was more typical that Finnish startups would kind of try to establish themselves first in Finland and then slowly expand globally. Yeah. Whereas in US it's just like right away your market is the whole world, or at least it's the whole United States, which makes the scale and the ambition a little bit bigger right away. Another thing that is really, I think for me at least, what was a big difference and a little bit intimidating at first, was that a lot of people are really well connected between the tech companies. So at Coinbase, we had many people who had worked before at Google, Airbnb, Facebook, all the big names. We even had this one guy who had worked at NASA and was like basically an aerospace engineer by trade. And people also have really impressive educational backgrounds. So it's very usual that people have studied at Stanford, MIT. Even my roommates, like one of them studied in Harvard and one in Stanford. And yeah, it's everybody it feels like everybody at least comes from like an Ivy League school or something similar. So that can be a little bit intimidating in the beginning. And then a third thing I would say is that there's a cultural difference, whereas in Finland, I think in a lot of companies and in the working life, you're kind of expected to be humble and really maybe lift others up, but kind of hide how you're doing, or at least not make a big deal about yourself. I think in US, you're just expected to kind of communicate more about what you're working on, what value you're bringing, and also be more confident, even a little bit like toot your own horn, make yourself known in the company. That's like just seen as a good practice. Whereas in Finland, it might be some of these behaviors might be seen as like bragging or being overly talking about yourself. But I think in the US, that's kind of the expectation that if you're not doing that, it's a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right about that. Then how about the really like practical stuff related to work? Could you like comment on salary, working hours, holidays, and healthcare, for instance?
Yeah. So, well, salary is way higher than in Finland. There is no question about that. San Francisco companies do pay really well. So that's kind of an obvious thing there. Working hours, I would say they're slightly longer than in Finland, but based on my experience, it's nothing too unreasonable. I think this is probably something that is depends on the company a lot, and also on the individual and what your role is and what stage the company is in. Also, if you have family, it might be very different. I was a single 24-year-old living my best life, so just working slightly longer days wasn't a big deal for me. Our company also offered free lunch and dinner. So there is this kind of an encouragement to stay a little bit later to enjoy the dinner and then maybe work for a little while after that. But for me, it didn't feel like I was working insane hours in any way. It's also kind of something to note that when in San Francisco, all of your friends are also kind of working at the same schedule. So I think in Finland, if you would work really long hours, you'd feel like you're missing out more because your friends or your social circle might be already enjoying their evening when you're still working. But I think in San Francisco, when everybody's working a little bit later, I would say my typical work days ended probably around 7 or 8 p.m. It's still totally fine to meet up with your friends after work, and it doesn't feel weird to like agree to meet up at 7:30 or something. In terms of healthcare, I was obviously very privileged in terms of being working in tech, having the tech company health insurance that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of healthcare, while I know there is a lot of differences between how these countries organize their healthcare, for me personally, I didn't experience any difference there.
Then how about other aspects of living in California other than work life? What did you do over the weekends?
Yeah, well, I would say California is just one of the best places in the world. I love California so much, and there is just everything for everyone. It couldn't be easier to do just different kinds of weekend trips, travel around, see different things. Nearby SF, I would say some of the highlights are wine country. If you like wine, I definitely do. There is this really, really awesome place called, well, there's of course Napa and Sonoma, but then there's this place called Healdsburg where you can bike between the wineries. That's like one of the, I would say, top three.
Oh, that sounds great.
It's so nice. Like, I couldn't recommend it more because typically if you go to wine country, you have to drive between the wineries and there can be a little bit of traffic and someone has to be the driver. Obviously, if you're biking, you don't want to get like drunk, but it does make the atmosphere a little bit more relaxed when you can just bike from winery to another and have a picnic and not having to worry at all about cars. Maybe this is the most European thing I could say, but I just, the driving everywhere can be fun, but when you're drinking wine, it doesn't really go well together. Sorry, I went on with the wine now. So moving on. I think that another thing really great about California is that maybe this is not the most environmentally friendly thing, but flying is extremely affordable in US in general. So flying to places that are maybe a little bit further away that you wouldn't necessarily drive to or that would be unreasonable to drive within a weekend is still possible when you fly. So things like we did a weekend trip to Grand Canyon, which did involve a lot of driving. I would maybe recommend reserving a couple of extra days, but I think Grand Canyon is like one of those sites that is just totally worth the hype, and it's just one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen.
Yeah, it is a great place.
It is.
Did you drive all the way?
We flew to Vegas and then we
Okay.
drove on Friday evening, 5 hours, saw the sunset. No, we drove on Saturday, 5 hours, saw the sunset at Grand Canyon, went to sleep, woke up in the morning to see the sunrise, and then drove back to Vegas on Sunday. This probably wasn't the best idea. It was fun, but I would maybe recommend having a couple of extra days there.
Yeah. Was there some other places?
Yeah. So then there is, I would say San Diego is one of my highlights. Definitely, we went. It's just a great beach city. I really enjoyed everything about it. They also have a lot of nice breweries. I think San Diego is one of the biggest microbrewery cities in United States. We also went canoeing there and saw dolphins swimming right next to us. We were just like, our canoeing trip kind of became this chasing dolphins trip where we're just starting to see where they're going and canoe right there.
It sounds amazing.
It was, yeah, one of those things you would never experience in Finland for sure. And then, yeah, like there's a lot of nice cities on the West Coast. So Seattle is really nice. Portland is one of the places there. I think, yeah, it's just very, very nice, especially during the summer. And then you have Yosemite, which is one of the most beautiful national parks in US. Definitely also worth the hype and has awesome mountains and waterfalls and hikes, and it's just, yeah, really, really great place as well. So yeah, I just
exactly.
I love California, and I know Grand Canyon is not in California, don't come at me, or Portland or Seattle, but West Coast in general is just very, very nice.
Yeah, you're right. There's just so many things to see, and you can literally go to Tahoe and go ski, and then the next weekend go surf in the Pacific or
I
something.
know.
Like you can do so many things,
It's so nice.
and the nature is really pretty amazing. Yeah, you're definitely right about that. So, if we sum up a little bit, going back, do you think Startuplifers experience changed your life? And if yes, how did this happen?
Yeah, I would definitely say the whole experience really changed my life quite drastically. To be fair, it was a big transition point in my life anyways. I was just graduating college, and I was finding my footing in terms of my career, and also just maturing as a human and becoming more independent. So I think that's a time of your life you anyways change quite a bit and you experience a lot of things. But going to SF, I think, really gave me a completely new perspective on not only like my career but also my life, and then also just gave me so much more courage to do things also in the future and go after things that I want. So I really can't even imagine what these last 5 years would have looked like if I hadn't gone, because it just impacted everything in my life. And yeah, like I think that the people you meet are basically the things that shape you the most. All the people that you meet and what you learn from them. And I think in SF I definitely met people that really not only like taught me a lot in my career and changed really my perspective on design and shaped the way I do design, but also just taught me a lot about life, and then also kind of became some of my best friends and really enriched my life also that way.
Yeah, that sounds like it was a small but big decision from like 2015, and during those 5 years, what has happened after that, and how you've kind of become very connected with California and the people there. Um, if you think back and reflect to today and your current job, the career you're leading now, and maybe even the life you're leading now, what are some of the biggest skills and kind of um, experience that you brought back with you and that has stayed with you and is still helpful to you in your daily life or your current job?
Yeah, well, I had some work experience before going to SF from a couple of agencies in Finland, um, and I definitely I'm very grateful for those experiences too, and I learned there a lot. But I would say that like the most that I know about building and shipping just digital products is based on just things I saw at Coinbase, and then also things I learned at Unity later. So definitely just basically everything I know about digital products, or most of it, anything that is practical and that I use every day, I've learned during that time. Um, And then, yeah, as I mentioned, just having the chance to work with some of the best designers and developers that have gone on to build all kinds of crazy, amazing things. It's been really a huge privilege and allowed me to learn so much more about design. So I don't know if I have anything like a single thing, because it really feels like of the 9 years I've been doing, or 8 or 9 years I've been doing this, 5 are from San Francisco. So it's almost everything I know is from there. I think, but also on top of like career or like this very practical design and digital product skills, I definitely learned a lot about how to communicate across cultures, how people can have very different perspectives, and how that can really enrich not only what you build, but also just your life and your own personal point of view.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a great conclusion for this first episode of this podcast. Thank you so much, Satu, for coming and sharing your life in San Francisco as a designer, and now 5 years after leading the team at Relex. So really interesting to hear your stories and experiences from that time. That's it for Leap. Thank you for listening. To hear more stories from Startuplifers alumni about their life-changing experiences at some of the most exciting startups, catch the new Leap episodes released on Spotify and Apple Music or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in applying for a startup job and becoming a stellar UX designer like Satu, go to startuplifers.org and check out the open positions or get straight in touch with the team. Until next time.